What's up, guys? So, we have finished the regular puzzles. We've done as much as the secret puzzles as I'm going to show you guys. Now it's time to do the last leg of this video series that I've been trying to accomplish, which is talking about the people who are really behind the secret. Now, first of all, I just want to add some context. After every time I finished one section, whether it be the regular puzzles or the secret puzzles or this information I'm going to share with you right now, I always contacted the publisher, John Colby. And this guy, he just doesn't want to talk to me. He just says, if you find it, we'll give it to you. But he's never tried to have a conversation. He's never said, oh, really? Oh, can you tell me more? Oh, wow. I've never heard that before. Nah, this guy, he just doesn't want to talk to me. For some reason, he's scared, whether it's because he's a poor publisher and he just doesn't want to lose his only money making book. I don't know. I don't know what other books he publishes, but I've never heard of him before. I've contacted John Jude Palancar. He says the publisher has all the intellectual property. Intellectual property means trade secrets. So he's got all the intellectual property. You got to talk to him. John Jude Palancar doesn't want to talk to me. And I've contacted this guy's agent. He sends him the messages, but for some reason, this guy's just afraid. And, that really makes me question the legitimacy of this secret treasure hunt. If it was legit, this guy would actually talk to you. But this guy, he's just like, nah, I'm not going to talk to you. Regardless of what I found, secret puzzles or some of the secret information I'm going to share with you right now, he doesn't want to talk. So in the last email, I told him, if he doesn't want to talk to me, I'm just going to share this information with you guys. And he basically said, thank you. So maybe I'm doing him a favor. I don't know. But if anybody has a problem with what I'm about to say right now, whether it's the people involved with writing the secret or the people who are connected to some of the organizations I'm going to talk about, well, I suggest you take it up with the publisher. Even though he's a little bit illiterate and mute, I'm sure he'd like to have a long one-word conversation with you. I try to keep this private, but that's not what he wanted. So anyway, we're going to get started. This is the last leg in the series. There's going to be about 4 or 5 videos, and I'll try and wrap it up. But this is the most interesting part. I hope you guys enjoy. So the first thing I want to show you guys is actually on the side of the Los Angeles Public Library. And on the side of the building is inscribed a quote I think kind of fits what we're about to do. It says, "Books alone are liberal and free. They give to all who ask. They emancipate all who serve them faithfully." This building was built by a man named Bertram Goodhue. Unfortunately, he died early on in his life, but a lot of his disciples and people who worked with him went on to do bigger projects like the Rockefeller Center and a couple of other things that we've talked about. Now, the reason I bring up this inscription is because when we're talking about the secret, we're talking about a book. We're not talking about 12 treasures buried in the ground, which is what people basically think this is. They think, oh, there's 12 treasures buried in the ground. I'm going to go solve the clues and I'm going to find them. That's partially right, but the whole basis is to actually read the book and find the information in there. I've told you guys before, you guys got to connect the dots. You got to find out why they're all connected, like how many people actually read the book? How many people are just here to find the gems and they didn't read the book? I mean, that's going to tell you right off the bat. Do you know what you're talking about? And of those people who have read the book, how many of you guys have actually researched the names in the book, the people, the buildings, the monuments? If you guys have done your research, you're going to know that there is a connection between all of them. Just like in any puzzle or mystery or game, sometimes you need to identify the trends. What works, what doesn't work, and once you identify the trends and you can figure out how everything is related and connected, then you can actually solve the puzzle, and it makes it a lot easier. I actually found a group that connected a lot of these people. There's an umbrella organization, and I'm just going to come out and tell you because I don't have time to waste. It's the Freemasons. So Freemasons are basically the backbone of what this puzzle, this secret treasure hunt is about. A lot of this stuff has to do with Freemasons. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through each puzzle individually from Roanoke all the way down to New York. And I'm going to tell you who some of these Freemasons were. Now, some of these Freemasons aren't labeled as Freemasons. Sometimes they are architects. And what Freemasons originally were masonries. You know, they were the people that built the buildings. And we're going to be talking about some architecture in this video as well. So I'm going to try and connect the dots for you right here. We're going to work on connecting the dots and showing you how these people are connected. A lot of people think that these clues are random, but you'd be wrong because they are all connected. Once you've connected the dots, then you can branch out and do more research and find more information, which is what I'm about to share with you guys right here. So we'll be going through each puzzle individually. Let's start with Roanoke first. What I did just to make it easier is I created a spreadsheet and it talks about all the people who were involved in the puzzle. And we can see names like Giovanni de Verrazzano, what he did. Sir Walter Raleigh was the person who sent a group to colonize Roanoke Island. And he also left with Sir Francis Drake back to England when he thought that he had set it up successfully. We saw Sir Francis Drake mentioned at Prayer Book Cross in San Francisco, so we have another connection right there. We have the Wright brothers and George Washington are the two people who are going to stand out. The Washington Balm Bridge. The Wright brothers, according to Round Rock Masonic Lodge 227, were Freemasons. You're going to find some conflicting reports saying that they may have or they may not have been. It's not 100% certain, but if a Freemasonry Masonic Lodge is saying that they were, who are we to dispute? So we'll go with that. And if you want to know about George Washington, there's actually on Wikipedia a page called List of Freemasons, which you can go through and look through. But George Washington was a Freemason, and it's confirmed here. Also, if you're ever in Alexandria, Virginia, there's actually a George Washington Masonic National Memorial there. So this guy was a big time Freemason, and everybody's heard about how Freemason designs are built into the city of Washington, D.C. Well, this is probably a reason why. And there's not too many other things of interest worth noting, so we're going to move on to the next puzzle in Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, a couple of things of note. The architect for the Lake Park was a man named Frederick Law Olmsted. And not only did he design and build Grant Park and Lake Park, or he designed Lake Park in Milwaukee, Grant Park, which was also Lake Park in Chicago. He also designed the campus for Stanford, which is where Byron went, UC Berkeley. He did Central Park in New York City, which we've kind of talked about. He built a park in Montreal, and he also did the grounds for the U.S. Capitol area. He tried to build the Golden Gate Park, but he was beat out by a local there. But this guy, Frederick Law Olmsted, did a lot of things that we've talked about in the past. Alfred Class, this guy built a staircase, but he also built something called the Tripoli Temple, which is part of the Shriners organization. The Shriners organization is a branch of Freemasonry. Next, you have Alexander Mitchell, and although we cannot say that Alexander Mitchell was a Freemason, if we were to look on his tomb, his marker, you can see he has some very interesting crosses right here. He also has columns on the side of his tomb as well. We'll talk about these crosses again a little later, but just something to point out. We also talk about Abraham Lincoln. We've talked about him multiple times, and there's a reason for that, which I will get to a little later, but we'll skip him for now. And Marietta Robusti, she was a painter during the Renaissance. I'm not going to talk too much about her, but we do notice that there is a lot of art that has to do with these pictures. I'm just going to come out and say it now. Most of these pictures are not original. They're actually based on something else. So just keep that in mind. But that's all the information to share in Milwaukee. We're going to move on now. Here we are in Cleveland, back at the Cultural Gardens, which are all a part of the Rockefeller Park. If we want to go and find out more things about this area in particular, we know that there's a Shakespeare Garden. There's also one in San Francisco, and there's also one in New York in Central Park. Terminal Tower, which is in the picture, was built by a company named Graham Anderson, Probst, and White. And it's actually an offset of one of its founders, Daniel Burnham, who died, and afterwards they started this firm. We'll talk about Daniel Burnham a little more later. Also, a quick reference to Carrere and Hastings. They were part of this group plan for Cleveland. If you guys want to look that up, go for it. We know John D. Rockefeller was mentioned several times. He was an oil tycoon and a philanthropist, and was located in New York and Cleveland. Socrates, Pindar, and Apelles. Apelles, of course, painted Alexander the Great, and Socrates was defended by his student Xenophon when he came under attack. So we have a little bit more connection there. But a lot of Greeks have been mentioned. That's something we'll talk about a little later as well. But these are the main points to keep in mind here. I'm not going to say that any of these people per se were Freemasons, but a couple of historical figures pop up specifically in this painting, and we'll get back to this a little later. Here we are back in Charleston, and we'll go through the list as well. Sir Francis Drake doesn't really have much to do with Charleston, except for the fact that he was a slave trader and a privateer and a pirate, so just kind of a connection there. But when they talk about Robert Louis Stevenson, something that I just wanted to mention really quickly, in San Francisco, just to the right of Alcatraz, there is a treasure island here. Strange. And also, if you go to Chinatown in Portsmouth Square, there is also a monument for Robert Louis Stevenson, which is strange because he has nothing to do with San Francisco yet. There's an island and there's also a monument to him. Very curious. But getting back to Charleston, a couple of things worth note. There was a man named William Martin Aiken who built the White Point Garden Bandstand, and this guy was also responsible for building the Denver and the Philadelphia U.S. Mint, so pretty important thing. Thomas Sumter, he was who Fort Sumter was named after, and then you also had a sculptor, Herman Atkins McNeil, who sculpted the Defenders of the Confederate inside White Point Garden, and he was also one of many people connected to the 1893 Chicago World Fair. I'm not going to talk about that clue, it's in the future, but you'd be surprised how many people are actually connected to that fair. So next we'll move on to Chicago. All right, here we are back in Chicago, and we're going to talk about some interesting things here. First off, the base for the Lincoln statue in Grant Park, that was built by a man named Stanford White, who was part of a architectural firm, McKim, Mead, and White. If you want to do more research on them, you can, but a lot of interesting stuff. Stanford White also was in charge of building the Boston Public Library, where we saw Thucydides and Xenophon on there. He was also a guy that built Tesla's Wardenclyffe. If you know anything about Nikola Tesla, very brilliant man, and he rivaled that of Thomas Edison, but we're not going to go too deep into him. A little bit about Stanford White, though. He was shot and killed based on some scandalous things he did. So if you want to learn about him, go for it. Daniel Burnham, he might possibly have been a Freemason. He built the Chicago Symphony Hall. He also built the Art Institute of Chicago, which are 2 points that we pointed out on the map earlier. And him and his partner also built the Chicago Masonic Temple building, which is where Freemasons used to have their Masonic Temple, but that's been torn down. He was also a part of the Chicago World's Fair, built the Flatiron Building. He built the Mount Wilson Observatory in Los Angeles, and he was a part of the group plan for Cleveland. His partner was John Wellborn Root, and he was a part of some of the same things that Burnham was, but unfortunately he died pretty early on. And he was also elected the director of the American Institute of Architects in 1887, a very prestigious organization for architects. And a couple of other people, Abraham Lincoln, we've seen him a lot. I'll talk more about him at a later time. Ulysses S. Grant, namesake for Grant Park. Now we have M&B. Well, that's for Mozart and Beethoven. Mozart was a confirmed Freemason, while Beethoven, there is no
record of him being a Freemason, you could see that several of Beethoven's biographers state that he was a Freemason based on other evidence. And also, he was friends with a lot of Freemasons and people in the Illuminati. And the Illuminati, basically, the illuminated ones, the enlightened ones. So, something very similar right there. But those are the people of interest in this puzzle, so we will move on. Here we are back in San Francisco, and we're going to be talking about a couple of things here. We talked previously about Sir Francis Drake, who has a cross here. He discovered New Albion, which is Marin County now. William Shakespeare, we've talked about him previously. There's a Shakespeare garden here. Shakespeare, one of the most famous literaries of all time. Robert Louis Stevenson, we talked about previously. Mark Twain, he was a confirmed Freemason. And Tom Sawyer Huck Finn, we've heard of that before. Frederick Law Olmsted almost built Golden Gate Park. He did have a little bit of influence, but it was ultimately built by a man named William Hammond Hall. And there was also a group, an architecture group called Reed and Reed, which built the Spreckles Temple of Music in Golden Gate Park, which is where we would pass by. Just listed them because they built the Hotel del Coronado, if you've ever heard of that, very famous in San Diego. And they also built the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. So just a couple of guys. But the only one that was mentioned by name in the poem, Mark Twain, was a confirmed Freemason. So we'll move on. Here we are back in Houston, and just wanted to point out first the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, which was built by Mies van der Rohe, who we talked about previously, and that's overlooking Herman Park right here. In Houston, there's not too many specific references, so just the most important things to point out about the park are it was built by a man named George Kessler, who was a confirmed Freemason. The park is named after George H. Herman, who was an oil tycoon. The fountains were named the Mecom Fountains after John W. Mecom, whose son was the owner of the New Orleans Saints. The Saints go marching in. There's a reason why the Saints are important. And just to touch on real quickly, there is an obelisk in Herman Park. Now, what is the significance of an obelisk, you might ask? I've kind of mentioned that more than once. But there is actually a obelisk in New York Central Park, and it's called the Cleopatra's Needle. And if you were to look it up, well, before I show you that, where I got this information from was from a History Channel show called America Unearthed. And season 3, episode 10 is called Big Apple Hieroglyphs. And here they talk about obelisks in New York City, one being Cleopatra's Needle. And the basic story about this obelisk is that it was imported by William Henry Vanderbilt, who was the eldest son of Cornelius Vanderbilt. It cost about $900,000 to do at that time. It was a huge undertaking. It was taken from the Egyptian city of Heliopolis. And what was found underneath the obelisk was probably the reason why they brought this obelisk over. They found Freemasonry tools, which date back thousands of years. So if these guys are saying that their lineage extends all the way back to the Egyptians and the obelisk is a symbol of that, then you can kind of see why it would be important. Also, if you wanted to scroll down, you could see that when the obelisk was brought, over 9,000 Masons paraded up Fifth Avenue from 14th Street to 82nd Street, and they were in full Mason outfits. So these guys were dressed to the tens in their Masonic gear, and it was a very important thing to them. To get 9,000 people to parade down Fifth Avenue, I mean, that's a serious undertaking. So obviously the obelisk means something to these people. So I wanted to share that with you. But as far as information goes, that's probably the only things of note in this puzzle, so we'll move on. Here we are back in Boston, puzzle number 8, and we're going to go through some of the things of significance here. I'm not going to talk about Christopher Columbus. That has to do with something else that I probably won't be talking about. But we've talked about Stanford White of McKim, Mead, and White. He was the guy who in charge of building the Boston Public Library. The Old North Church in Boston, that was inspired by a gentleman named Christopher Wren, and he built St. Paul's Cathedral in London after the Great London Fire. But Christopher Wren was a confirmed Freemason, even though the designer of Old North Church, believe his first name was Ebenezer. It's not confirmed that he was a Freemason, but several people who used the church, including Paul Revere, were confirmed Freemasons. Also, there's a gentleman named Henry Bacon who was also involved with the Boston Public Library. This guy also built the Walloon Settlement Memorial in Battery Park, which we've talked about in New York. He also worked on the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., Penn Station in New York City, and he was a part of many others at the Chicago World's Fair. I won't talk about Joseph Langone, Thucydides, and Xenophon. You can look up yourself if you want. George Washington, we already know that he is a confirmed Freemason. Paul Revere, a confirmed Freemason. Alexander Hamilton, although it's not confirmed that he was a Freemason, something very interesting about him is that he is buried at Trinity Church in lower Manhattan. But you can see on his grave, his tomb, there is what appears to be an elongated obelisk. Very strange for somebody to have some kind of a monument like this, but that's what he has. Also, the book or the puzzle mentions Sojourner Truth, who is a slave abolitionist, and she helped in the Underground Railroad. One show that I watched that was very informative about slavery in Boston was the show Cities of the Underworld. And in season 1, episode 10, there is a show titled Freemason Underground, which takes place in Boston, Philadelphia, and Concord, Massachusetts. And here, Don Wildman, he talks about how Freemasons used to help slaves, runaway slaves, hide in their homes in secret compartments or in their barns or chicken coops or something. Freemasons in general, he said, did not like slavery. Freemasons are about liberty and brotherhood and that kind of things. So it's very interesting that they would choose Boston and talk about the Freemason Underground that helped free slaves. So just something to keep in mind. But that's about all of interest for now. We'll move on. Here we are back in St. Augustine, and in St. Augustine, there's not much to talk about here except for Ponce de Leon. There's only really two things to talk about. Ponce de Leon, who was a Spanish explorer slash conquistador. One interesting thing about him, though, was that his family was part of an order called the Order of Calatrava. And the Order of Calatrava was basically something very similar to the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were founded to help fulfill a vow of perpetual war against the Muslims, and the Templars were unable to hold Calatrava. So a volunteer warrior, Raymond, the abbot of the Cistercian monastery of Fitero, offered himself, and they recruited people, and basically they became the Order of Calatrava, which was a similar branch of the Knights Templar to help Spain protect against the Muslims trying to invade from the North African area. And the only other place worth talking about was the Ponce de Leon Hotel, which was built by a architecture firm, Carrere and Hastings. And Carrere and Hastings built a lot of other things, like the Standard Oil Building for Rockefeller and Flagler. They were part of the group plan in Cleveland. They built the New York Public Library, the Old Metropolitan House, the Manhattan Bridge, and other things as well. But those are the only two things of note for St. Augustine. Now, here we are back in Montreal, the site of puzzle number 10 on St. Helens Island. There's not much from the poem to really go off of, except for the island itself and possibly the Isle of Notre Dame. The main things to point out were the explorers, Samuel de Champlain and Jacques Cartier. Frederick Law Olmsted, he didn't build the park on St. Helens, so we won't talk about him. And Jean Drapeau, Park. He's not a Freemason, so nothing to worry about there. But Samuel de Champlain, there was an article done by Harvey R. Doane, and it talks about if Masonry existed in Nova Scotia in 1606. And it talks about how in 1827, two men found a stone with a figure on it, and it said 1606 at the top, and below it, it looked like there was a square and compass traditionally associated with Freemasonry on the bottom. The location was found at Granville, opposite Goat Island, and about 30 feet from the shore, and that was part of the land cleared and settled by French expedition under Samuel de Champlain and Sieur de Mons in 1605. So it's quite possible he was a Freemason. There is evidence of a stone being placed there with a time frame that Samuel de Champlain was there. Whether or not he was a Freemason, that's debatable, but very interesting to note that. Also, the Ile Notre Dame, there's also a Notre Dame Basilica of Montreal, probably most likely referenced to the Notre Dame of Paris. And this is the most famous Notre Dame by far, but the Notre Dame basically means Our Lady, and it's dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And we know that this has gargoyles. We talked about that a little bit beforehand. So kind of interesting that they would name the island Notre Dame, Our Lady. And just one more quick note, if we did a satellite view, we could see the Biosphere Environment Museum. This was built by Buckminster Fuller, the geodesic dome. So here it is. Just wanted to show you that. But aside from that, there's not much to go off of here, so we'll move on to the next puzzle. Here we are back in New York, and we're going to go over some of the things of interest. Ellis Island is a place of interest, but it was built by the federal government, so we're not going to talk too much about that. But it was a place where they used to hang pirates, and also it was once called Seagull Island after the Mohegan name Kiosk. So just something to keep in mind about there. But the things of important here are going to be things we've talked about previously. Verrazano, who we know sailed around New York down to North Carolina. Isaac Newton Phelps, he suggested the design for Battery Park in New York, and he also built the New York Daily News building, as well as the Chicago Tribune Tower. Frederick Bartholdi, Gustav Eiffel, and Richard Morris Hunt, all of them worked on the Statue of Liberty. All three were Freemasons, and some of the work by Gustav Eiffel, like the Eiffel Tower, and Richard Morris Hunt, he also worked on several other things like Columbia University, the New York Tribune building, and he worked at the Chicago World's Fair as well. Henry Bacon, we've talked about previously, having built the Walloon Settlement Memorial. The sculptor for the Verrazano Monument was Ettore Jimenez. He also created a Dante Alighieri statue, Dante's Inferno, and there's actually a Dante statue in Cleveland as well, next to the Italian Cultural Gardens. Here we'd also talk about FDR going on his street. FDR was a Freemason, and Jesse DeForest, he was the Walloon leader. So not much there, but several people that are mentioned in this clue are known Freemasons, and several other architects built buildings which we will talk about or have talked about previously. So we'll move on from here. Here we are back in New Orleans over by Lafayette Square, and this one has a lot more information that we can use, so we'll run through it real quickly. James Gallier, he built the Gallier Hall, and he also built St. Charles Hotel that burned down to the ground. We have a reference to John W. Mecom, whose son owned the New Orleans Saints, and we passed through the Superdome going through Lafayette Street. John McDonough, we spoke about him. He donated $2 million to education upon his death. The Marquis de Lafayette, there's a lot of information about him, but he was a confirmed Freemason. Henry Clay, whose statue is in the park, is a Freemason. Benjamin Franklin, he was a big-time Freemason, and he was also the first Postmaster General. Louis Armstrong, was not exactly a Freemason. He was part of the Knights of Pythias, which is similar to Shriners and whatnot. It was a branch of Freemasonry. Supposedly, he was claimed by Prince Hall of Montgomery Lodge, um, but that one doesn't exist. And a little bit more about the Marquis de Lafayette. His family was part of the Musketeers. You've heard of the Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas, and his family was also involved in the Crusades. So a little bit more about those people right there. But you could see there is a Freemason background in a lot of the people in New Orleans. So we'll move on. Now, since we did the San Antonio tribute puzzle, and it kind of goes in line what we're talking about, I'm just gonna go over this real quickly as well. Uh, it's funny, almost everybody who was involved in the Alamo was a Freemason. There was actually an episode on America Unearthed, episode Secrets from the Alamo, season 3, episode 1, and he talks about Davy Crockett, the Battle of the Alamo, and whatnot. This was free on history to check out, but unfortunately it's not anymore. But something that he saw particularly was that there is a Freemason plaque on the side of the Alamo, and it talks about the people like Jim Bowie, David Crockett, Almiron Dickinson. His wife was Susanna Dickinson, who we saw a statue about, William Barrett Travis, and other Freemasons who were involved. Also, we talked briefly about Benito Juarez, and this guy was actually a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. So, Freemasonry in Mexico is something that is alive and well. And also, who they fought against at the Alamo, Generalissimo de Santa Anna. In the episode of America Unearthed, it's proven that the Generalissimo, he too was a Scottish Rites Freemason from Mexico. So basically, at the Alamo, it was Freemasons fighting Scottish Rites Freemasons, which is kind of contradictory since there should be a brotherhood, but everybody involved at the Alamo was a Freemason. So real quickly, why did John Wayne invest $1.5 million of his own money into making the Alamo? Well, John Wayne himself was a Freemason. I believe he was a 33rd degree Mason, and his lodge is in Marion McDaniel Masonic Lodge number 56 in Tucson, Arizona. But obviously, if he was a Freemason and everybody at the Alamo was a Freemason, then it was important for him to tell that story because those are probably people that he idolized and admired a lot. So, not a surprise that John Wayne, one of the great actors who was a Freemason, did that movie, The Alamo. Something to keep in mind, and we'll move on now. Are back in Los Angeles, and because Los Angeles is puzzle 13, 15, and 21, I'm just going to go through all of them at the same time. I'm not going to go through each individual one, but I will touch on a few, and you can kind of see some relations if you want to read about them. Christopher Columbus, something I want to mention about him, his ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, they all bore these flags on their mast sails, and these are what's known as Templar crosses, so just something to keep in mind there. Uh, Christopher Columbus sailed for Portugal, and there's a reason why Portugal had Templar flags, and we'll talk about that later. Daniel Boone and Lewis and Clark both were Freemasons. Twain we spoke about. Now, I do want to touch on some of the architects who were in charge of building some of the places that we bookmarked that were part of the puzzle. John and Donald Parkinson, they built the LA Memorial Coliseum, USC, and they were part of the LA City Hall project. Elmer Gray worked on the Beverly Hills Hotel, the Huntington Library, the Lincoln Shrine, Mount Wilson Observatory. And there was a guy named Paul R. Williams. He worked on the Beverly Hills Hotel as a redesign. He helped with the Shrine Auditorium and the Ambassador Hotel. This guy was one of the first African American architects in Los Angeles County, and there was still some racism at the time, but he was admired so much that a lot of white actors like Lucille Ball, Frank Sinatra, Barbara Stanwyck, who were very popular during their time, they actually had him uh, build their houses for them. And something that was really interesting about Paul R. Williams is that he learned to write and sketch upside down because some of his clients did not feel comfortable sitting next to him. He would do it upside down so he could sit across the table from them and give them the work. Also, he built his home in Lafayette Square, which we talked about, which is a bunch of the older pre-Revolutionary War stuff. Chauncey Skilling, there's a reason for the uh, church there. I won't talk about that just yet. Albert C. Martin and his son built LA City Hall, Cedar-Sinai Hospital. Charles Luckman, Cedar-Sinai Hospital, CBS Television City, the Disneyland Hotel, the Forum. Worked on Madison Square Garden, the Kennedy Space Center, LAX. So this guy was very big, Charles Luckman. Myers and Holland, they built the Charlie Chaplin Studio. They built the Egyptian Theater and Grauman's Theater, Cafe Montmartre, and they also built the Wilshire Scottish Rites Temple, which we will talk about later. Welton Beckett, he built Capitol Records Building. He built things over at UCLA, the LA Customs and Federal Building, the Peterson Automotive Museum, Disney World Resort, and Fashion Island down in Irvine. Albert Landsberg built the Palace, the El Capitan, the Orpheum, part of Shrine Auditorium, and Temple Sinai in Oakland, California. He also built the Wiltern, very famous building there. S. Charles Lee built the Fox Wilshire Theater, the Max Factor Salon, the Hollywood Theater, and the Temple of Israel at Hollywood. John C. Austin, this guy was very important, built Griffith Observatory, the Hollywood Masonic Temple, the Shrine Auditorium, LA City Hall, and he built the LA Hall of Justice, which is where Charles Manson and Saran Saran had their trials. Saran Saran, he killed RFK Jr. over at the Ambassador Hotel. Myron Hunt worked on Mount Wilson Observatory, the Ambassador Hotel, the Huntington Estate and Mansion and Library, and he also built a home for Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. Kind of funny there. Gordon Kaufman built the Hoover Dam, the Greystone Mansion, Santa Anita Parks, the LA Times Building, and the Hollywood Palladium. William Douglas Lee, the Chateau Marmont, El Royale, the Textile Building and the Garment Building in what is now Fashion District. This gentleman, William Pereira, built things for the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, but he also helped build Television City in Hollywood, the Fox Plaza, which is the headquarters. He helped with the Disneyland Hotel and also USC. He also built something pretty interesting, the Transamerica Pyramid Building in San Francisco. This guy was very busy. Arthur Frolick, the Santa Anita Racetrack, the Hollywood Park Racetrack, Hanna-Barbera Studios, the White Memorial Medical Center, I know a little bit about that, and a couple other places. One person I wanted to talk about specifically was a gentleman named Charles E. Toberman. This guy was a real estate developer, and he was in charge of many of the places that we talked about, including the Hollywood Bowl, the El Capitan Theater, uh, the Hollywood Masonic Temple, and much more. This guy was a 33rd degree Master Mason, and he was in charge of a lot of the development in Hollywood. They called him the father of Hollywood, and as a Freemason, it's not a surprise that he did a lot of building. A couple of other people that I wanted to point out, Cecil B. DeMille, Adolph Zucker, Daryl F. Zanuck. These guys were heads of Paramount Pictures. They were related to Samuel Goldwyn. And Daryl Zanuck was part of Warner Brothers and Fox Studios. These guys were all Freemasons as well, as was Jack L. Warner, co-founder of Warner Brothers Studios. Someone we haven't talked about too much before, but John Philip Sousa, who wrote the Stars and Stripes Forever, Semper Fidelis, the Washington Post. He was a confirmed Freemason. A couple of sports players, Ty Cobb, Willie Mays, both of those guys were Freemasons as well. And we talked about John Wayne being a Freemason as well. So there were a lot of people that were talked about in Los Angeles, but you could see that there's a Freemason connection, mostly through the architecture. These guys all work together, you know. And what is architecture? What is Stonemasonry, that's kind of the basis of what Freemasonry is. Builders. So the American Institute of Architects, well, you can't say that they are Freemasons, but they do the same things, masonry, which is what the old stonemasons used to do. So we'll move on to New York next. Here we are back in New York, and most of the points were in New York City, but some of them extended out to New Jersey and Queens and a little further out. But this is going to be New York, which involves puzzle 14, 16, and 22, which was really part of 21. We'll go through just the most important names that are Freemasons or people that had something to do with the building of those projects. So we know Daniel Boone and Lewis and Clark were both Freemasons. Henry Ford, who they spoke about, was a Freemason, along with Charles Lindbergh, who flew from Roosevelt Field in the spirit of St. Louis. All of these guys were Freemasons. We have a gentleman here, Isaac Newton Phelps Stokes, and he was the gentleman that suggested the Battery Park design. He built the New York Daily News building and also the Chicago Tribune building. Bartholdi Eiffel and Richard Morris Hunt all were a part of building the Statue of Liberty. Bartholdi also built statues of Lafayette and Columbus. Whereas Eiffel, we know the Eiffel Tower and some of the other things that he did, but Richard Morris Hunt also worked at the Chicago's World's Fair in 1893. He helped with the New York Tribune building, the Met, Columbia University, and Carnegie Hall as well. Probably one of the most important people in New York architecture was a man named George B. Post. He built the first skyscraper, which is considered by most the Western Union Telegraph building. He also built the New York Hospital and worked on the New York World building, which was the Pulitzer building. He built the New York Times building, the New York Stock Exchange building. He built an exhibit over at the Chicago World's Fair for the Liberal Arts building. He built the Vanderbilt Mansion, and his son built the Hearst Tower in 1927. The guy under him, Joseph Urban, he worked on the base of the Hearst Tower. He also built the Florence Ziegfeld Theater, who I've kind of touched on previously. And also one interesting thing was that he built Mar-a-Lago, which our current president, Donald Trump, that's his residence outside of Washington, D.C., Mar-a-Lago. There were several people involved with Grand Central Station, mainly William Wilgus, Reed and Stern, and Warren and Wetmore. Warren and Wetmore, they were related to the Vanderbilts, I believe, and they did a lot of work for them, including the Vanderbilt Hotel, 3 Ritz-Carltons, and the Consolidated Edison building. So they had a few more projects. This gentleman, Wallace Harrison, worked on Rockefeller Center, the United Nations headquarters. He was in charge of the 1964 World's Fair Master Plan. Walt Disney was also involved in that as well. Harrison also built and designed the LaGuardia Airport Tower, JFK Airport, the Met Opera House and Philharmonic Hall at Lincoln Center, and also Battery Park City. This gentleman, Eugene DeRosa, built many theaters on Broadway, like the Times Square Theater and the Vanderbilt Theater. Raymond Hood, J. Andre Fallou, John Meade Howell, Harvey Wiley Corbett. These guys were also instrumental in building Rockefeller Center. Most of these guys worked together on other projects like the Chicago Tribune building, the American Radiator building, the Daily News building, and Hood and Fulhu, they also built the Scranton Masonic Temple. John Meade Howell, he built a home for Mark Twain, who was a family friend of his, and he also built St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia University. Harvey Wiley Corbett, along with Rockefeller Center, he worked on 2 World Fairs, one in Chicago and one in New York, but he was also the man in charge for building the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. So pretty big project there that we spoke about previously. McKim, Mead, and White, where Stanford White was a partner at. Penn Station, he built that. He was a big part of New York University campus, Columbia University campus. They also worked on White House renovations, as well as a bunch of other projects. A lot of these architects who we're speaking about at one time or another worked for McKim, Mead, and White as well. William Mitchell Kendall worked on Columbia University, the Washington Square Arch, the Penn Station Post Office, and one project that he worked on in particular that was pretty interesting was the Pilgrim Memorial State Park, and that has to do with the Society of Mayflower Descendants. I was actually surprised to find out that I'm descended from 3 people who were on the Mayflower, so go Pilgrim Memorial State Park. That's pretty cool. We've talked briefly about the Vanderbilt family who had Grand Central Station built. It was their big project. And we also talked about how the Vanderbilts had imported an obelisk from Heliopolis to New York, which had a procession of 9,000 Freemasons behind it. So something to remember there. And we know that George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Theodore Roosevelt, these guys were all Freemasons as well. So we have a list of some pretty important people who did some very important things, and they were all Freemasons. Alright, so I wanted to show you this involving the video that we're doing. Next time somebody asks you why only one of the 12 puzzles was based on the West Coast, San Francisco only, well, now you're going to have an answer as to why. So we're going to play Connect the Dots once more. Now, after we've connected the dots, we could see something kind of taking shape, but let me put it to you in another way. Now, if you compare the map on its side to what a Freemason emblem looks like, you can see very clearly that there is a bit of a resemblance. Unfortunately, the lines aren't exactly 100% straight, but what Byron was trying to accomplish was putting these important cities into a system that he could connect the dots, or you can connect the dots to make the Freemason symbol. You could see the compass on one side and the straight 90-degree ruler kind of on the other, even though this isn't too straight, but give him credit for setting it up. He could have used other cities that probably would have made it look a little better, but he wanted to use these cities for a particular reason. So I know some people have said ICALs are important. Well, geographical, this is why these cities and points are important. And one more thing I'll show you. And if you take a look on the left, this is a Freemason diagram, whether it's for initiation or for one of their meetings. You can find this information all online. But if you look at the picture, you'll see that it starts with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it goes all the way. The last number is going to be 21 right here. How many puzzles do we have? We have 22, but the number is 21 that you make when you combine 21 and 22. And here in the Freemason diagram, we have 21 people or whatnot that are supposed to be involved here. So 21 and 21, those numbers match up. We've made a Freemason symbol in the 12 original puzzles if you plot them and you connect the dots. And we've seen that a lot of the people involved in the book that are mentioned, or some of their buildings or whatnot, were Freemasons as well. So I give to you the Freemason connection, and what I'll do next is I'll go a little further and I'll show you a little bit more about some of the hidden things in the 12 drawn pictures that will connect Freemasonry a little better. So appreciate you guys watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.